Hey guys, Mr. Hyatt here. This is the Chapter 2 AP Biology lecture. We're starting out the year looking at the chemical context of life. Most of this should be review from your chemistry class, but it's definitely important that we're all on the same page rolling into the year because, as you probably know, there's a ton of chemistry involved with biology. So we got to make sure we're uniting these two subjects. So we're going to start by looking at how we organize life from the atomic level up to the organismal level. Eventually, we'll go from the organismal level all the way up to the biosphere that includes all life here on Earth. So we start out down at the atomic level. Hopefully you remember lots about that from chemistry and certainly some of the molecular level stuff as well. Here in AP Bio, we're going to package molecules into organelles, and we're going to package organelles into cells, and cells are going to form tissues. Tissues are going to form organs. Organs are going to form organ systems. Organ systems are going to combine to form organisms. So as we build these first couple of chapters, that's the pattern that we're going to follow. We're going to start small and we're going to get bigger. Just a couple of definitions for us. We know that matter is anything that has mass and occupies space. And we know that atoms are the smallest particle of elements. So elements, we're going to see soon, have their own traits. They have their own qualities, and those hold true all the way down to the atomic level. Once we start splitting the atom, we start losing some of those elemental properties. Remember that anything you see with an A is absolutely necessary. It's definitely something that's going to be tested. So elements, the definition of an element is matter made up of only one type of atom. You know from chemistry that there are 92 naturally occurring elements. Hopefully you remember lots about the atomic structure and the periodic table and all those types of things. And each element has a symbol, whether it's O or N or Fe or C or any of the symbols. If we combine elements, remember our organization structure, we combine our atoms and we form compounds. So now we've got multiple elements in fixed ratios. Those compounds, again, have characteristics beyond those of the combined elements. It's the idea of emergence, that when you combine things, the sum is more than, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So those ratios are important. Something that has one ratio of oxygen to hydrogen is going to have a different set of characteristics than something that has another ratio. And we'll talk more about that as we go. We said that there are 92 naturally occurring elements, but we really only need about 25 of those for life. And when I say we, I mean we organisms, not we humans. So keep that in mind as we roll through this lecture as well. Here you see a table from your book that details those 25 elements. You've got some elements at the top that are more important, that take up more of our body weight, and then you've got some trace elements down there at the bottom. Notice the oxygen level is 65% of our body weight. Hydrogen's 9.5% of our body weight. Keep in mind a lot of that's going to be in water. Not all of it, but a lot of it's going to be in water that's inside of our bodies. 18.5% carbon, we're carbon-based life forms, so that probably isn't real surprising to you. Nitrogen gets wrapped into the four most important elements for life. A lot of the times we talk about CHON, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Nitrogen's way down to only 3.3% of our body. But from there it gets really small. 1.5%, 1%, down to 0.1% for magnesium. And then you see that the trace elements are less than 0.01% of our body weight. So talk a little bit more about those here in a second. Macro elements, if you look back at that last slide, you'll see those are the elements outlined here. These are our macro elements. We need large quantities of those. Something like nitrogen would be a good example of a macro element. Let's take a look at what happens in a plant that has nitrogen versus a plant that does not have nitrogen. Most of our fertilizers that we apply for plants are either phosphorus or nitrogen or some combination of the two. So over here we see how important this macro element is to the growth of the plant, because over here it doesn't work. We remove the nitrogen and the plant doesn't grow as well. Again, it's a macro element. Microelements are equally as important, Maybe not equally as important, but still really important, but we just don't need quite as much of them. We call them trace elements because we have small amounts, and you see some examples listed there. The lady on the next slide, she's short on iodine, so she's developed something called a goiter. We see that a lot when our microelements are thrown off. We notice phenotypic changes or things that we can observe. Getting back to elements specifically, hopefully you remember that the atomic number is the number of protons in the nucleus, and each one has its own atomic number. We know that we can manipulate the number of electrons, and we can manipulate the number of neutrons, and we get ions, and we get we get isotopes. But if we change the number of protons, we change the element. So that atomic number is truly the identity of the element. Atomic mass, again, is a review from chemistry, the number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus, and we know we can change that. If we get an isotope, we've got a different number of neutrons, so our atomic mass would be different. So something like carbon-14, something like carbon-16, things along those lines. While we're on the subject of atomic mass, here is our current atomic model. In the center of the electron cloud, we see our nucleus. It's got our protons and our neutrons, and our electrons buzz around the outside. Hopefully you remember that it's not as nice and neat as this picture shows. We'll talk a little bit about orbitals here in just a minute, but of course we know that it's not ever as nice and neat as it appears in a textbook or in a hand drawing. Word I keep using, isotope. That's going to be kind of like a different version of the same atom. It's going to have a different atomic mass because we're changing the number of neutrons. So again, carbon-14 is a good example. We can use these as tracers in the medical field, and we can drink an isotope that's radioactive, and it shows up on an MRI or some sort of a scan. We use them in carbon dating to establish how old things are. Types of isotopes, we've got radioactive isotopes. That's the one I talked about. Nucleus decays spontaneously, so particles are going to be emitted, radiation is going to be emitted, energy is going to be emitted, all those types of things. Heavy isotopes they have a stable nucleus, but the mass is more than the standard isotope for the element. We'll talk about heavy water. We'll talk about several heavy elements, heavy hydrogen, throughout the course of the year. Don't forget that this is our definition. Another definition is energy. That's the ability to do work. Again, that's really a review. Potential energy is going to be the energy that matter stores because of its location or its position. And the reason that we're talking through this might seem sort of artificial, but what we're getting towards is the energy stored in our atoms. So we're talking about the potential energy of electrons. Let's take a look at a picture. Remember that your electrons are organized into shells. As we move out, as an electron moves out away from the nucleus, we're going to absorb energy. As an electron is pushed towards the nucleus, we're going to lose energy. Here's kind of the words that explain that picture. So the energy, we call them orbitals. The energy levels are around the nucleus of an atom. The first level can have 2 electrons and has the lowest potential energy. That's the s orbital. Other levels can hold more than 2 and have higher energy levels, again, as we move out. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's not as nice and neat as it was drawn in that picture. Electrons are 3D, so it's tough to draw them in a 2D environment. The different orbitals have different shapes, mostly due to negative repulsion. You got 2 negatively charged electrons. They're going to push away from each other. It's going to cause them to travel in kind of some funky shapes. Remember that each orbital can only hold 2 electrons. So if we get something that's really low on the periodic table and has like 32 electrons or maybe 100 electrons, we're going to have some funky looking orbital shapes because we're going to have, if it's 100, we're going to have 50 different orbitals. They're going to be at a few energy levels, but they're going to be in many orbitals. Here's kind of what we're talking about. If we just have one, say hydrogen or helium, this is what our electron cloud is going to look like. That's why we like that atomic structure diagram to be helium. Here's our 2s orbital, and here's our 2p orbital. So that'd be something like carbon, for example, would be something that would have a pattern sort of like this. When we combine those orbitals and we look at a carbon atom, it's messy. And this is even neater than it would be in reality because, again, it's a drawing, it's an oversimplification. We'll leave off here and we'll pick up lecture 2 on this slide. See you there.